Today our devotion once again comes from the Gospel of Matthew. We've been following along as Matthew is unfolding the story of Jesus. And today, if you look in chapter 8, verse 23 to chapter 9 through verse 13, that's our Gospel reading for today. And our verse for the day comes from chapter 8, verse 26. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, you of little faith?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a dead calm. Now, remember yesterday, if you watched yesterday, we talked about Matthew chapter 7 and verse 24, and Jesus talking about how everyone who acted on his words would be like a man building his house on a rock. And when the storm came, right, the house would stand firm. And now just a few verses later, in chapter 8, beginning at verse 23, we see Jesus and his disciples in a storm. Get it? So he talked about, if you believe my words and act on them, you'll be able to stand in the storms. And now we see the disciples in the boat with Jesus in a storm. And how do they respond? Not so well. They wake up Jesus and say, "Lord, save us, we're perishing." And that's what led to the verse of the day. Why are you afraid, you of little faith? So in a sense, they sat in a classroom on a hillside listening to a long lecture by Jesus all about faith and living with faith and how living with faith helps us to stand in the storms of life. And then they got in a storm and they immediately showed they didn't have that faith yet. They weren't acting on those words. And while it's easy for me to smile and chuckle at the disciples' response, how often does that happen to us, right? I mean, we read our Bible, we listen to devotions, we pray, we go to worship, and we're all like prayed up and worshiped up, and then something happens, and it's like all of that goes out of our mind, and we react out of our humanness rather than out of our faith and trust in God. And so that's just something we always want to remember. And whenever I read this story, and I can't tell you how many times I've read it and reading through the Gospels in my life, one of the things that always sticks with me, always comes back to me is, where is Jesus while this storm is going on? He's in the same boat. And as long as Jesus is in your boat, it doesn't matter how stormy the seas or how strong the wind, right? As long as you're with Jesus, you're where you should be, and you're okay. No matter what that means, even in terms of this physical life or our going on to glory and our life eternal. As long as Jesus is in my boat, or to put it another way, as long as I'm in the boat with Jesus, we truly don't need to be afraid.